Jeremy, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great to see you. Are you at home? Where are you now?
I'm in a studio I've just had built in my garden, which I'm still moving into. And as you can see, it's a mixture of a work studio, but it's also a mixture of a music studio as well. And so I do my work here and I do my music here.
Fantastic. I think this is something that many people, many teachers who know you all around the world from your books and conferences, they are not aware of the fact that you are actually a professional musician. And I have to say, I was surprised when I came across the website, otherloves.co.uk. Is that correct? Yeah. And I decided, okay, I have to listen to it. I have to really take some time and listen to your music, because to be honest, don't take me wrong, but that my impression was that you were one of those many teachers and people who do other things who, when they are also saying, I'm a musician, I play music, they grab the guitar, they just strum it like, some chords and so on. And my eyes were open wide when I turned it on and I started listening. And I have to say, because I'm also a musician, I also play the guitar. And I have to say, I was really surprised by the fact how good you are. And you are actually a seasoned musician. So that was a big surprise to me. I hadn't known that before, and I learned something new about you while doing my little research.
We're going to maybe get onto this later on, but particularly during lockdown, music became just a sort of vital lifeline for everything. And there's one question I know that you'd like to ask, and I'm looking forward to that, because I play this kind of music, the stuff you've heard on their website, but I also play dots as well. I'm a classical violist.
Wow.
Last night we were rehearsing in an orchestra, at one of the orchestras I play in. We were rehearsing Dvorak and Mahler, and I just think I'm so incredibly lucky to have these kind of two realities. I mean, quite apart from our personal lives, that's a completely different thing. But you know what joy music gives you, and how it takes you away from, your other life and stuff like that. And we're just very lucky, is what I think.
That's what I have to agree with, because especially during times like lockdown, where there are very few opportunities to actually do anything, either at home or outside, is a lifesaver.
Totally.
And I absolutely agree with you. And I think many musicians in the world, even though it's been, the times have been hard for musicians during lockdown, because obviously there weren't any concerts, and many musicians who do it professionally couldn't earn for their living during that time. On the other hand, it does help you to escape, and it does help you to get into a totally different world. And let's be honest, forget about everything around you. Yeah.
And I know, I'm certainly one of them, but I know a lot of other creatives, or whatever you want to call people, had some very positive things to say about lockdown. I am certainly a better musician than I was before lockdown started.
There you go. Okay, that's amazing.
But that doesn't before you, I sound sort of, that doesn't detract from the terrible things that lockdown also did.
Obviously.
The suffering, the loneliness, and certainly in the field of English language teaching, the ruining of schools and careers and everything. So I repeat, you and me, we're incredibly lucky that we have this other thing. I understand that you have 3 children. I imagine they kept you quite busy during.
Oh yes, you can imagine that.
My children are grown up, and for me, one of the worst aspects of lockdown, thank God I didn't lose anybody I'm close to, was not being able to see my daughters and my granddaughters, and it's not that much of a suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like it at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of those positive outcomes, if we can talk about them in that light, I call them silver linings of the pandemic. There are a few other things that happened to me as well, because at the point when I run language schools, and at some point we didn't have any choice. We had to switch to online, and I very quickly realized that those classes lack something. We need to add something to it to make them more lively, and more natural. So I instantly thought, okay, wait, but I've been working in different places with teachers from all around the world. So I quickly got connected with some teachers from various countries and started inviting them as guests to our online classes. And I also came up with that idea for the charity project that I still run now with African teachers doing classes online. And it just opened my eyes that, okay, everybody's switched from hating online teaching, because let's be honest, most people didn't like it in the past, to the necessity, and gradually to the fact that many people realize, oh, why did I hate that?
I need to pick you up on that. I'm talking to so many teachers about the lockdown time. There's such a range of feeling and emotions about it. For me, the biggest thing about lockdown is it suggests to me a sensible, rational re-look at teacher training and initial teacher training, because you cannot teach online in the same way as you teach face-to-face, although you can.
Yeah.
But the online environment seems to me to place a special emphasis on some issues. And these issues are sort of often taught as afterthoughts on teacher training courses, because we are obsessed on teacher training courses with issues to do with presentation and patterns and grammar patterns and so on and so forth. And there are good reasons for that.
Yeah.
But actually, what I've understood about the lockdown experience, which it's been a constant kind of battle all my professional life, which, just looking at me, you can imagine has been going on for quite a long time. This clash between a sort of an item-based view of language learning. You need to learn so many bits and pieces and then you can do it, versus a kind of more holistic view of language learning. I think if you were planning a teacher training course from the beginning now, having lived the lockdown experience, having lived the online experience, you'd have to sort of start saying that there are other issues which are paramount long before you get to language, and there are issues to do with community and support and activity and task and so on, and things like that. And they have to rise, it seems to me, to the top of the teacher training tree, and the kind of whole language analysis, teaching 6 sentences with the present simple or so on, need to move further down the agenda. They're important and they're a technical skill that a teacher needs. But there are many other technical skills as well, which should tend to have always been, because I'll stop in a minute. I did my 4-week teacher training course, which wasn't even called the CELTA in those days. Like, I'm not even going to tell you when I did it. It's just like a long time ago. But if I reflect on my course, it's not significantly different from what happens now. I mean, if you came, you'd think it was kind of cute and funny because of our greatest technological sort of thing we had was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. That was the big deal,
Yeah.
But otherwise, the content, the approach, the lead into what you do with teachers in training was sort of the same as it is now.
I can say that, I'm observing the same. Not much changed as for the actual things that we do in class. Yeah.
Well, they didn't. And then, like you, everyone went online. And I don't know what your experience has been talking to other people online. You obviously, you made your own course, and the idea of bringing other people in and so on. I have a story about that. But the fact is, the teachers who tried to replicate the kind of methodology which dominates English language teaching probably had less success online than the teachers who had to dig deep and find other ways of bringing the students with them and creating that online community and having a sense of group cohesion and identity and involvement. Because I mean, an interesting side effect of, it's not interesting if you're a writer of the pandemic, it was the catastrophic decline in book sales.
Ah, yeah.
Now, and why was that? Well, because online, what you can't say, well, you can, but you can't say online, all right, everyone, open your books on page 26. It doesn't work.
But
That's
you
where
see,
the
many
cameras
people
go.
did that. And there is another issue that I noticed during the pandemic, that one thing, what you've mentioned, teachers weren't prepared for that at all. The other thing, they were expected to deal with it without any support.
I agree with that.
So looking at teachers who work like full time and have many classes during the day, the challenge, the biggest challenge for them was to deal with technical issues, you know, and then to grab it all and try to make it happen, let alone the teaching itself. So they basically, like you said, copied and pasted the same stuff they were doing in classes, you know, into online, which obviously doesn't work. And now the thing is, and you said the right thing, it's in the teacher training. This is where we should be looking for that, because the teachers are not supposed to invent it. They are not supposed to, like, you know, come up with the idea and quickly do it themselves. And this is what they had to do.
To be fair to the profession, to us, there have been lots of technophile teachers and people who advocate the use of technology.
Yeah.
Like Scott Thornbury, who I know you talked to. I mean, we taught online for about 11, 12 years. Wasn't the same kind of teaching. When the pandemic hit and lockdown happened, it took everyone by surprise, including the trainers, including the methodology. I mean, everyone just went, oh my God, you know. I have an experience that I remember. One of my MA students, just coming towards the end of the course, and she lived in, was it Wisconsin or somewhere in the United States? And she lived with her 7-year-old son who had learning difficulties, a sort of a learning disability. She was teaching an adult ESL class, and then they went online. And one of the most extraordinary conversations I've had was with her on a FaceTime conversation about 48 hours after this all started. And her son's school was not offering much support, because I suspect her son's school was as completely kind of, you know, like that as everything.
Yeah.
And she was having to discover it all for herself. The reason that conversation will never leave me is her resilience was just extraordinary. But, you know, in an ideal world, she wouldn't have had to do it herself. You know, there she was, and she was furiously getting emails from other people. And, you know, the first big hurdle, how do you do this breakout room stuff? What's that all about? You know, blah, 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 blah. And it's like herding cats at the beginning. So I think this, I don't think this is controversial, but it's a slightly weird thing to say. I think that this lockdown experience may be the most exciting thing that's happened in language teaching methodology in my lifetime, because there was always a saying that one of the greatest moments in any language school, a sort of organized, structured, hierarchical language school, was when, you know, a whole level changed a course book. Because what would happen is that the teachers would, for the first few weeks and months of using the new course book, tearing their hair out, you know, talking, you'd find conversations in the staff room all the time. That lesson, how did you do that lesson? I had such trouble, the students did blah, blah, you know, you had this incredible kind of bubbling, mutual participatory teacher development happening. I mean, I'm idealizing it, you know, at the best, fantastic like that. Well, this was like that, only multiplied by about 1 million, you know, and I repeat, it's made me think about teaching, not in a different way, but and I didn't teach relentlessly online like some people. You referred to this a few minutes ago, that you know, teaching online relentlessly, 8 groups in one day. I've talked to people who said, you know, a few weeks of that, and it's like someone's been hitting you over the head with a shovel, you know, and not real coffee breaks. Do you have time to go to the loo? Well, you know, but there's so much to say about all that. But in the end, a sort of typical, open your books at page 26 and let's do exercise 5. It didn't cut it, did it? Yeah. You didn't have everything you needed, which was this sense of community, the bringing together of a group, to try and create a group and a home in the situation that you are in now, which is, I'm just looking at my screen now. With only 2 people, it's a lot easier, obviously. Yeah. Because we can relate to each other, and you're not going to disappear, and you've got your camera on willingly, etc., etc. We could be talking about this for ages. I just wanted to mention one more aspect, something we both touched, like, you know, over the last 5 minutes. That's just to summarize that you know, for many teachers, there was that kind of a silver lining in the fact that they had a chance to wake up and realize that teaching is not about the books. Teaching is not about apps, is not about, like, you know, because many people, what they did, they tried to get as many attractive things as possible to make it, like, you know, kind of like a theater to entertain the students. And that was the like, you know, the most of the thing I can understand is because you want to keep them engaged and they're just looking at the screen. But many teachers, and that also happens in my school, many teachers went through a transition, through a transformation where they realize what is the core thing in class, and that it doesn't matter whether you're online or in person, face to face, wherever you are. You have to remember what are the core elements of it and what the students need to do and to take from it. And if you understand that, I think you can be thrown in any situation as a teacher and you will cope, because you won't be trying to rediscover America, but you will remember that, okay, there are those things there, but what my role is to do this and that, and this is like some of the things we'll be talking about today, but it's the root of the whole thing that we have to remember about, and why we are there and what we are supposed to do. Look, we've got a problem, and our profession has always had this problem. Well, it's not a problem, but there's for me, there's always been, you know, and everything that Scott goes on about dogme, and way back in the 1970s, all the stuff about community language learning and all this kind of thing, and the communicative movement, you know, when that kind of sort of emerged in the 1970s, 80s, things like that, is all focused around this one, to me, sort of central difficulty, which is, on one level, you can say that learning a language is a technical issue. You know, you can't adequately live in a language unless you can manipulate its grammar. You can't adequately live in a language unless you can deploy a lot of lexical chunks, and you need to obey various conventions of writing and speaking to make it work. And that's all very technical. But that conflicts with and a whole other aspect, which is if you put a group of kids together in a classroom, some growth experience has to happen. And the success of that endeavor for the group is not just tied up with what I just talked about, how to, the conventions of speaking, the conventions of writing. It's not just tied up with that. There are other things going on. And so if you want to be romantic about it, and I keep mentioning Scott, he's a romantic. If you want to be romantic about it, well, then of course you're going to head towards a kind of holistic, communicative, emergent language view of it. But if you want to, if you want to be able to say to a huge population of parents or employers or something like that, look, you can rely on us, we're doing it. That's less of an issue, because what you want to say is, look, this guy Marek, I know he can speak English because look, piece of paper, score. And the only thing you can really score satisfactorily is precisely those conventions of speaking and writing. And they did. Now that seems to me to be, it's just a fault line that runs through our discussions about teaching all the time. And I can't quite remember the conversations I had about the beginning at the beginning of my career, obviously, because it was hundreds of years ago. But essentially, we had those conversations then and now, and we will go on having them in the future, unless someone can come up with, a sort of magic formula which allows you to inject the bits. And now, an outfit like Duolingo, things like that, they try to get around it. They're focused on the bits, the items, the accumulation of little different bits, and the grammar and the vocabulary, everything else like that. Their big, the big promise of that kind of technology is adaptive learning. So that the claim is good software can adapt to you personally better than any teacher ever will, because they'll never make a mistake, and better than any teacher, they'll never get tired and that kind of thing, or bad-tempered or whatever. But in the end, if you believe that language learning is all about learning how to understand and communicate, understand other people and communicate with them well, then you're going to have that dichotomy, that fault line. It's always going to be there. Listen,
you've published books that have become Bibles for English teachers all around the world. You've trained many teachers. You've been helping them, and you've had different perspectives on the teaching learning process. A question, a science fiction question to you now. If you could travel in time and for 5 minutes you could have a meeting with the teachers who were your teachers, who taught you when you were at school, how would you spend those 5 minutes with them? What would you tell them that you think might have had some influence on what kind of person you are now?
There was one teacher who I'll never forget, who exemplified everything that I think was good and bad about teaching all at the same time. And he was a music teacher. So I went from a junior school, and at the age of 13, because I was engaged in my parents' choice, not mine, private education and so on and so forth. And so at the age of 13, I went to a new school. And I went to my first piano lesson with a new teacher. And so I arrived at the room where he did his teaching, and he said, "Good morning, play me something." So I played him something. It was a piece of Chopin, and I wasn't very good. It was the military polonaise, And my fingers are all over it, squash. But I got through it very proudly. And at the end of it, he said, "Oh dear, I think we have some problems here. The only thing we can do is to go back to the beginning and start again." Now, I've since been very involved in the world of music, and I've talked to a lot of people who studied music far more seriously than I did. This is a common story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't know if it's happened to you, it's like when the plumber comes around because you have a problem and they look at it and they say, "Oh dear, who did this?" "Oh no, I'm afraid we're gonna have to rip it all out and start again."
Oh my God, yeah.
It's that kind. The result of this teacher saying that to me was that I gave up piano 2 weeks later.
Oh.
That was the end of that.
Uh-huh.
And I will always regret it, but I was 13. And he just basically whacked me over the head and said, "You're crap."
Mm-hmm.
The same teacher, I had quite a good voice. I mean, a sort of a choir voice, you know, I was a bass. By that stage, my voice had changed. I was a bass. And we had various competitions, and I sort of conducted a choir and things like that. The same teacher in that field gave me the most incredible encouragement. He even wrote a song for a competition for me to sing, a sort of classical song, this short straight solo. And what I would love to say to him if I can meet him now is, how did those two things happen?
Yeah.
Because you were the most. This is a guy who, whatever he thought of me, because he was a professional musician, a really good teacher at a really top school. So my singing or whatever, it wasn't seriously good. I was never going to be, you know, blah blah blah. But he appeared to believe in me. The result is I went for that singing and that conducting of this house choir and stuff like that with absolute total commitment, you know.
Uh-huh.
This was a school with 850 boys in it, and there was one competition, a big stage, you know, all the boys in the school, and we sang a piece of Bach for piano, oboe, and voice, and we won. And that was because of him. But I don't play the piano. When I do, I play. You can see I've got a hand harmonium thing there, the most wonderful instrument.
Yeah.
And I play chords, I can play melody lines and things like that. But the idea of me trying to play Chopin anymore, you know. So I'd love to say to him, his name was Anthony Smith Masters, and I would love to say to him, help me out. I would just love to hear his reflection on that, because and a lesson I would learn from it, the piano lesson was you've got to work with what you've got. You've got to find a way. It's what Jeff Petty, a British writer, he talks about medals and missions. You know, whatever students do, however small or big, you give them a medal, and then you give them a mission. But the problem about what he did there, and actually I'm enjoying talking about this because I've talked about it lots, but this is now becoming very clear. The problem, what he did there is he didn't give me any medal. He didn't say, yes, well done, you did something. He went straight in with the kill. Whereas with the whole singing thing, 2 or 3 years later, because my voice by that stage had settled and, you know, and that kind of thing. What he gave me was just pure encouragement. And because he gave me pure encouragement, I worked my backside off, you know, through the difficulties, through, you know, well, you've got to sing this, you've got to sing, you know, and there was a funny little interval here. It was like that, you know, how strange. I would really love to talk to him about that.
Yeah, you see, so what you just said, so the power that teachers hold in their hands, I think many of us, many teachers are not aware of it. And I'll give you another story. I'm not sure if you've heard it. Something that I found as a milestone in approach to kids, to students, and so on. I was listening to that interview with some kind of a ballet dancer. She was like the best in the world. I'm not sure, like, I don't remember the names or anything. I just listened to that interview, and the host asked her, "So, can you tell us how it all started? How come you are so wonderful at this age, and how come you progressed so fast, and you are just like, incomparable?" And she said, "You know what? I was a horrible kid. I was my teachers couldn't stand me. My parents constantly had to come to school and have a chat with the director and the teachers, and they all said that I just disturb everybody else in class. I keep moving. I can't concentrate, and I have learning problems, learning disorders, and they have no idea what that was. So they said, you have to probably visit some psychologist and seek for some professional help, because she is having serious learning problems." And she said that was just horrible to me, that moment when my parents started taking me and to the doctors and visiting them and talking about myself. But there was one who changed my life forever. So when we visited him, my parents and myself, we got into the room, we had a short chat, and they introduced the whole thing, all the problems. And then he said, "Can you please leave the room and leave the child here?" Okay. They left the room, and it's like one of those doors leading to the classrooms where you have that glass panel you can see through. So they left the room, and he switched on music on the radio or something there. And the girl suddenly started like moving to the rhythm of the music, and she started like, tapping and moving her feet and everything. He called the parents back, and he said, "It's nothing wrong with her. She's a dancer." Mm-hmm. And they were just shocked. They were like, "What do you mean she's a dancer?" I said, "Yes, this is the problem. She needs to be surrounded with people like herself. She need to find a place where she will have the same kind of people around her, where she can dance with them and everything." They took her to some dance classes, and she says, "I remember that this day was the best day of my life. I suddenly appeared surrounded with people like me. They were exactly like me. We all wanted to move to dance, and it was, I felt like suddenly I was in heaven." So this is again the power of one.
We get very seduced by stories like that, because they're so wonderful, and they make your heart sing, and and all of us as teachers want to be that teacher who said there's nothing wrong with it, and who got it. That's very idealistic. It doesn't happen like that very often. Life isn't that, and there are some students who it's really impossible to reach. Mm-hmm. Not impossible, difficult.
But these stories are supposed to inspire.
But the reason for these stories, and the story I told you about this guy in my school, is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And the reason we tell these stories is because they don't tell us what to do, but they do tell us something fundamental about the issue of a teacher and a learner.
Yeah.
Yes, the problem we have is that when you've got, when I taught in Mexico for many years, I had 30 students in a classroom, which I kind of love, by the way, because you can have a group is such a wonderful kind of living, breathing thing. Yeah. And 30 people laughing is better than one person laughing. That's a highly contentious game. But you sort of know what I mean. A laugh from 30 people.
Yeah.
Everyone always says, "Aren't you really terrified at teachers' conferences when you have to give a talk to a couple of thousand people?" Well, yes, of course you're terrified. Mm. But the first laugh is, I don't mean you have to make people laugh, but the first laugh, the first kind of murmur of agreement, whatever it is fantastic with a big group like that. It's much more difficult in a group of 30 to have the dancer moment, or you know, that one of the things interesting, I mean, we're going backwards and forwards. One of the things interestingly about lockdown is you had a chance to reach that girl.
Yes.
In a way that you don't in a face-to-face classroom.
Absolutely.
The fact is, you can use, in the middle of whatever's happening, you can send direct messages.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get in touch with them and email them legitimately and have them on board and make personal contact and try and reach out to individuals in a way that in a face-to-face classroom is so much more difficult. The only thing you can do is, Merrick, would you stay behind after the class?
Yeah, exactly.
Which doesn't do the same thing at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, full stop.
All right. Jeremy, I'm going to share something with you now. And I'd like you to tell us what it is, because I think many people are not familiar with it.
Oh, I know what that is. Yeah. That's the Orquestra de Instrumentos Reciclados de Cateora in Paraguay.
Wow, beautiful. Okay, what exactly is it?
Also called sometimes the landfill harmonic. There's a guy, I think his name was Luis Salan, and he has, I don't know anything about him, but he's a conductor, and he believes, like many people, that it's one of his responsibilities to go around his society playing good classical music to them and trying to encourage students to take part. Mm-hmm. Now, I should say in brackets that classical music doesn't interest some people at all, which is very silly, because every time they watch on TV a series, anytime you watch one of those and I want you to feel sad, I'll play you on the soundtrack there'll be music which is like classical music. Yeah, because classical music and jazz and popular music, heavy metal and classical music have so much in common. Some of the great minimalist music of the latter half of the 20th century, and some of the sort of the techno groups and things like that, they're living out of the same book. They just do it differently. I think I'm completely committed to the idea that if you can get people involved in appreciating and taking part in music, it's just a great thing for them. It's not the greatest thing. There are lots of other great things, but it's a wonderful thing to do. Anyway, so this guy used to go around, in his case, Paraguay, in South America, and play music to kids, in the hope that some of these kids would go, oh, I want to do that. Very much like the ballet dancer story. And if I do that to a group of kids, are they all going to say, yes, please, I want to learn the violin? No, but some of them will. And the others might have an experience that sort of just broadens their minds. Anyway, and he went to this place called Cateora. Now, I've never been to Cateora, but as far as I understand, I wouldn't especially like to, because it's a place where it's really a town based around a huge, I think it's the country's biggest garbage dump. But they went there and played, and the kids there went nuts for this fantastic thing. But they didn't have any instruments, and they sure didn't have any money. And then one guy who knew blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he went to this man who had a little wooden hut in the middle of the garbage dump, and who sort of recycled stuff. And he said, could you make a violin out of junk? And the guy sort of said, the story is, I'm not sure if it's true, what's a violin? I don't believe that. But anyway, but that's the story. Anyway, so they measured it up and thought about it and things like that. And then he started using bits of old baking trays and bits of old hairbrush handles and all that kind of stuff. And damn it, he made a violin. And I'd rather have a $35 million Stradivarius, but but this one sort of sounded like a violin-ish. And then he started making other instruments. And then they started teaching these kids to play these instruments. And suddenly they had what they called the recycled orchestra. of people playing oil drums and old bits of plumbing tubing for a flute, you know, with little bit of moneditas, little coins as the thingy, brains gone. And I've seen video of them playing. It's recognized, you know, of them playing Mozart and things. And is it great music? Well, no, but it's not bad. And so so suddenly they were being asked to play, and it became inspirational. And they found themselves at one. There was one. Who was the band? It was a heavy
Metallica,
wasn't it? Yeah, and there they were on the. I think you probably watched the same video.
Yeah,
in front of about sort of 100,000 people. These kids going on their oil drum. Wow, they played in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, one of the most venerated kind of European concert halls from way back. And then you know that talk about conundrums, and then lots of people got to hear these stories, and they started sending these kids nice instruments, which begs the question, you know, and that's a good thing, isn't it? But then maybe it isn't a good thing because these kids had achieved this special thing, and as sort of ambassadors for recycling and for being amazing at what they did. And I just give you a really nice violin. Well, you play the violin. It's a really interesting conundrum. It's an inspirational story in the same way that in Venezuela you had El Sistema, which you must know about, this incredible series where they started teaching kids from the slums classical music. And now one of them, from precisely that El Sistema, from the system, a guy called Gustavo Dudamel, is probably the highest paid conductor in the world. He's the same age as my younger daughter, coincidentally, who works with him and for him. So he's about 40, and he came from this system. He's the ballet dancer of your story. I don't mean, I've no idea whether he was a difficult kid. That's not what I mean. It's
yeah, of course, yeah.
So there's so much to learn from that recycled orchestra story, because one solution to the fact these kids really want to play a violin and they want to have orchestras is to say, yeah, but where are we going to get them from? And then just feel regretful all the time that you couldn't help these kids. But this other solution is, what's that awful expression, blue sky thinking or whatever, I don't know what it is. It's just, well, yes, of course, what a brilliant idea. But like all brilliant ideas and obvious ideas, well, obviously that's a good thing to do. It's only obvious when somebody else thinks about it. It's an extraordinary story, don't you think?
It is absolutely. And it's what you've just said reminds me of another thing I remember. There was one commercial that really surprised me, and I still remember it, have it in front of me. In the 1990s, there was some commercial of beers, probably in the US. I saw it on YouTube at some point. So there was a blues musician sitting on the porch of his house, beautiful car, beautiful wife, you know, and he's got this guitar with him, and he's trying to play something, and it just doesn't work. He cannot get, like, you know, the right mood and everything. And suddenly his wife inside, you can see through the window, finds traces of lipstick on his collar of his shirt. Yeah. So she starts shouting, and then the iron falls down. The house gets on fire. She leaves him. The car is burned too. The man is sitting there with this guitar, the only thing he's got left, and he starts playing, and he says, "Okay, yes, I've got it. Now it sounds right."
Yeah, that's a very funny comment about the blues as well, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was genius. I don't even remember what it advertised. It advertised some kind of a beer, but I remember that story, and it's, I think, something we should all think about, especially at these times now, where we basically have everything on our doorstep. Yeah, and is it good or is it bad? Yeah, and this leads me to something I want to ask you about, because you see this concept, the recycled orchestra in music. Then we have dogma in cinematography, which the name was also borrowed by Scott in Teaching Unplugged book. And finally, teaching applied in teaching itself, those three concepts in those three worlds, they have the same thing in common. Yeah, they stem from the same thing. But what value do they bring into those worlds, and why does something like that happen at the top of technological developments, like that is surrounding us everywhere?
Just before we leave the Recycle Orchestra, I wanted to think about something much more profound and serious. Something I never expected to see in my lifetime, but then we'd already seen it. We just hadn't really been looking. We saw it in Aleppo, in Syria. We saw it in what the Allies did in Iraq and all this kind of thing. This kind of just foul and disgusting and unnecessary slaughter and destruction, but you end up being profoundly moved by someone hiding in a subway with a violin playing, and everyone finding in that the most inspirational moment, and people coming together and singing the national anthem, for example, or whatever else. We know about the huge benefits of singing in a choir. I don't mean singing Mozart, I mean singing gospel songs, singing jazz songs, singing pop songs. Singing together in a choir has the most incredible benefits for your health, for your mental health, for your breathing, it's just like the ultimate health cure for everything you've ever had wrong with you. And it takes us right back to where we began this conversation, or about this whole thing about community. And I insist that probably the biggest thing I learned from lockdown was that community is the beginning and end of all group activities. Now, if we were talking about one-to-one teaching, for example, one-to-one relationships, your relationship with your wife, we're not going to talk about that, but that kind of thing. But then that's a different conversation. But I'm sure we would find similar kind of strands going backwards and forwards. But community matters. Now, you asked me, I think if I understand your question correctly, is isn't it interesting how as we get technologically more and more sophisticated, people are coming along with further kind of baseline, sort of very sort of basic stuff.
Yeah. Because it is kind of like, back to concept of creating something from nothing. Yeah. You basically try to close your eyes, make everything disappear, and then find the real thing.
It's very complicated, isn't it? I've got a car on order, and it's one of these cars which it's got cruise control, which what that is. You say speed limit is 50, so you say go at 50 miles an hour, but it's got adaptive cruise control. So if the car in front slows down, my car will automatically slow down.
Yeah.
And if the car in front stops, my car will come to a stop as well. Wow. And in 10 years, maybe there won't be any steering wheel. I don't know. Very seductive.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that AI in general is going to start being, it's in more and more aspects of our life, whether it's the adaptive, the very prehistoric version is Duolingo's adaptive learning, where it responds to your progress to do the next thing. And, science fiction forever has been fascinated by the relationship between sort of robots and humans and that kind of thing. and I don't know what the future is like, and I probably won't be around long enough to see much of it, but in the end, so far, we're still human beings.
Yeah.
Responsible for our own lives and what we do and how we handle it.
I think this is the answer to it.
And I can completely organize your life by giving you access to these incredible machines and things that do everything for you, and you won't need logs for your wood burning fire anymore because something, and you know, some machine will say, right, it's time to put more logs on the fire, and they'll do it for you, so you don't have to do it anymore, or whatever, you know. But in the end, you're still you, and you still have to decide, I don't know how old your kids are, what to do when one of your kids starts acting up. I mean, one of your own children starts acting up. What do you do? And how does that reflect your values? And how does it reflect your views about child rearing? Of course, in the moment, you often don't have a chance to reflect on that. It's a weird business being a parent, isn't it? It's all totally reactive. And and afterwards you think, oh, I shouldn't, oh, that.
Why? Yeah.
I remember saying to my daughter when she was a young teenager, my eldest daughter, she was saying, yeah. And I said, look, look, cut me some slack. I've never been a parent of a teenager before. I'm doing my best. Sorry, but what I'm trying to say is we're all us, and we all have to decide how to make it better for us and for the other people that we consider to be important to us. And the degree to which you consider other people to be important is well, it depends who you are. And we want some agency. We want, I have a brother who's very disabled, my kid brother, and it's getting worse. And almost the worst thing about it is not the disability, it's the removal of agency. And you can counteract that with all sorts of care and stuff like that. But the removal of agency is the worst thing that's happened to him almost. Because he can't decide to sort of get up and do something. He can't decide to, I want to do this. He relies on other people to help him, but we can. And it's up to us. And it's up to what happens in our brains and what we feel like doing that make us who we are, good or bad.
I didn't expect it to go this way, but I think this illustrates exactly the answer to this question. Why do we need things like that? Yes, we need them to feel that we can actually exist. We have the control of some things without all that technology, and we want to be able to do things ourselves and without that help that we have available everywhere now. I mean, it's like, it's an interesting example you gave, and I think it's kind of like an eye-opener for everybody, what you've just said. And speaking of those three concepts, the recycled orchestra, you know, and dogma and the teaching style, where you start from, like, you know, go back to the root, but they have nothing available, and you try to teach. It all, like, you know, it's been answered by you, by giving.
Look, you know that old saying, if you can't teach with just a stick in the desert, you can't really teach at all. You know, it's famous for the old saying.
Yeah, but you see, this leads me to another thing I wanted to ask you about, because you see, we are both musicians, and we are both aware of the fact that in those two worlds, musicians and teachers, there are, generalizing, then there are two kinds of musicians and teachers. There are those musicians who can only play music with notes in front of them, and that will be closed book for teachers, yeah. And there are those kinds of musicians who basically don't use any notes at all, and they prefer improvising, and they prefer reinventing things that I play every single time, with different approach and different emotions and so on. And the same for teachers. There are teachers who, contrary to those who use a lot of course books, they don't use course books at all, and they prefer to feel it when being in class, and go with the emotions and with the feeling, and adapt to it. And these are the two different kinds of musicians and teachers. Now, I've always been the second one, although I like course books, because course books give me a nice base, for the class, and I can decide what I use or not, how much of it I use, and so on. But I used to think that it's all in stages. So first you train to be a teacher, and you learn how to use the course book and other materials, and then you gradually get to the stage where you don't need anything and you can do it. But then after observing some of the teachers over the past, 15, 20 years, I realized that it's not really about the stages, because some teachers will never transfer and will never go through that transition and start working without materials. What's your take on this? How do you see this?
Set up a discussion which will probably take us about 4 days. Okay, here are a few random thoughts. Because again, this is something you and me both musicians. I'm always fascinated trying to find correspondences between my two worlds. Well, I've got many more worlds, but those two particular worlds. And so the improvisers, for example, but there was one study done where they went to some of the great, the great early 20th century, mid 20th century jazz saxophonists, and analyzed. I don't know whether they included people like Miles Davis on the trumpet. I don't know, but they analyzed what they did, and what they found was that each individual musician had a whole lot of little riffs, little
like chunks.
That's precisely what they had. Little chunks, and they deployed them all the time. Maybe in a different key, slightly different rhythm, but they kept coming back to these chunks, but not in the same order, and not in the same way, and not quite the same way. And the analogy with language is so tempting, it's impossible. That's what we do with language chunks. I mean, some of these situations, like a jazz musician we're in, like jazz musicians are entirely predictable. So that lots of the interactions we have, like, oh, hi, nice to meet you, nice to see you. But an awful lot of the time, we're very creative in the way we put the chunks together. So even improvisational musicians are not free. What they're doing is they're using an absolute kind of repository of bits and pieces to make this thing. So then the question is, how do you get the bits and pieces there? And then I think about the dots. So, because the guitar I just kind of picked up really, and talking to other guitar friends, and did I ever have a lesson? I might have had at the very beginning. Someone might have taught me how to do G, C, D7 or something like that. I'm not a great guitarist, but I'm quite competent, and the biggest learning experience for me was when I was at university, going to the university folk club and finding myself sitting a few feet away from some of the great singer-songwriters and guitarists of those days, and just looking at them going, what are they doing? And trying to imitate it. Now, I can't imitate it. I'm not nearly as good as they are, but I'm proficient, and I've done that mostly through kind of trial and error. So that would be a sort of that's not dogma exactly, but it's sort of a very laid back approach, and not much teaching, but massive amount of learning. But when you learn to play a classical instrument, the training says, incredibly devoted amounts of practice. Hours and hours and hours practicing the tiniest little things. But as a guy called Anders Ericsson says, If it's not deliberate practice, if it's not deliberate, you might as well stop wasting your time. What does he mean by deliberate? He means that when you're practicing this little fragment on your viola, you have to be completely focusing on what you're doing. You have to be cognitively entirely engaged. You have to concentrate. You have to become aware of exactly what happens when you do this and when you do that, and whether this angle of the bow, what's my little finger doing? What you have to absolutely concentrate on what you're doing. And the more you concentrate, and the more you're entirely conscious and listening to what you're doing, and absolutely like that, the better it gets. And then the practice has some payoff. Now, I find practicing the viola really difficult. I find it motivationally a big challenge for me. I repeat, last night I was at a rehearsal, we were playing Mahler and Dvorak, just about the best fun anyone could ever have in the world, if you like that kind of thing. You don't have to like it, but but I was just there, kind of completely gripped by this. The whole of the rest of the world did not exist while we were doing that. Ukraine, never heard of it. It was just completely in the moment, in the zone, and thinking and concentrating. Wow, fantastic. But we were using the course book. But the question is, what were we doing? This is what I'm coming to. What was happening in our heads? Because that's the great secret. It's if I'm going to be a language, I can make you repeat sentences with the present simple. Together, everybody. I can do that, and it works. By the way, repetition works until it doesn't work, and then that's a whole other story. But the real issue is what's happening in you, Marek, my student. What's happening in your head? Because that's where learning takes place. And the fact is, I've no idea how to control that. I've no idea how to make it work. People keep coming up with ideas. They say, oh, well, it's all about neuro-linguistic programming. Bullshit. If it's true that different people have preferences and things like that and respond differently. But anyway, but the real question is, how can I take to you an experience that makes the stuff in here do its work, and also the stuff in here to use the, how can I make you, how can I talk a lot about deep processing, the idea that if you process something deeply, you're far more likely to learn it than if you think about it shallowly. And what does deep processing mean? It means sort of cognitive and emotional engagement, memorable emotional cognitive engagement. So that if I ask you to learn some words, this is very shorthand, you're far more likely to remember them if I say, look at this list of words and decide which ones you like, than if I say to you, look at this list of words and tell me how many of them have the letter I in them. You're probably more likely to remember them if I say the first thing, I think. Unless you're the kind of person who's really turned on by the letter I. I'm being really silly, but that it's so bloody difficult. And if it wasn't difficult, we'd all have stopped worrying about it years ago. We just do it.
Yeah, and what you said, I wanted to relate to that because you see, I keep changing the way I give advice to my students and to teachers. And remember, in the past, I would tell everybody, if you want to get fluent more quickly, if you want to speed up the process of learning the language, you should basically surround yourself with it and switch the radio to English and switch telly to English and so on. You don't have to concentrate, just play it, let it be around you. Okay, and I've been giving this advice for a long time. Then I started learning Italian from absolute zero, and I started applying that thing to my learning. after half a year, I realized it doesn't do anything because I don't focus at that time. I'm not aware. What you said it's like, really working there. So I realized that this is ridiculous. I'm trying to do something that is impossible. I don't understand what they're talking about. So how can I learn from it? It's just impossible, And then it dawned on me that I have to switch everything that I've been thinking about, like, as for self-learning a language at home, and start using different methods, different things. And then I realized, first of all, I have to understand it. And secondly, like you said, I have to be aware and focused at the moment of doing it.
My problem is that just about every discussion we have about language learning leads me into a kind of, leads me down this road. And then I find myself in front of a lake and I don't understand where the lake begins and ends and what the hell's going on. So the one language I speak well is Spanish.
Okay. When did you start learning that?
And but I at the age of 24, 25, I went to live in Mexico.
Okay.
And I taught English in Mexico, and my girlfriend, who became my wife, was bilingual. I didn't have any Spanish at all. So for the first few months, whenever we were in a Spanish-speaking place, she did all the work.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But I ended up beginning to start, I started wanting to say things in a store, going to a store and asking for something. There were things I wanted to do. There were things, I don't know how it happened. It happened because I really wanted, I was processing all over the place deeply to try and do some things I needed to do and I wanted to do. And I fell completely in love with Mexican culture and Mexican stuff like that. And I wanted that as well. And then I started getting some roles where I had to actually speak to people who didn't speak English. And then you have to take your car to the mechanic, and you have to try and explain what's going on. And unless you've got the word for salpicadera, which means a wing or something, the wing, or frenos, the brakes, or whatever it is, you're stuffed. And so I did that. But but at school, I learned French, and ridiculously, I took my early French exam at least a year early because I was good at it. And then I gave up because I passed the exam. So what's the point of going on? Yeah. I mean, my teenage life is full of such really bad decisions. But that was all grammar translation. But what happened is that then about 4 years later, I went to work on the grape harvest near Montpellier in the south of France. And for the first week I was mute, and the second week I spoke French. And those, you couldn't get two more opposite experiences. And I come back to what I said, which is it's all about what's happening in your brain. Now, obviously, when I did grammar translation at the age of 13, 14, and my brain must have been engaged with it and stuff like that, because, I can still speak some fairly sort of B1. I can speak some B1 French, maybe, sort of, and I have an absolute confidence that if I found myself in French-speaking society for a few months, I would rapidly develop my French speaking. But my girlfriend now is Brazilian, and she speaks perfect English. And I go to Brazil. I've been going to Brazil for years on talks and teachers' conferences and teacher training and all that kind of thing. Everyone I always meet speaks English. I mean, mostly. And she speaks perfect English and things like that. And I'm finding learning Portuguese really, really difficult. And it's because of something in here. I don't know what it is. And maybe I haven't given enough time to it. Maybe I haven't committed to it deeply. And then I tried a language at random. When I was teaching, doing some teacher training, and we all signed up for Duolingo. So I decided I'd learn Swedish. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
I gave up after about a week. I just thought. So why am I telling you this? Well, partly because I'm a complete failure and I'm now going to have to kill myself. But partly because it really isn't easy. It doesn't happen, and I can't believe that having the language all around you doesn't help. But I don't think it helps very much, which is your point.
Yeah.
You have to. It has to happen in here.
Yeah.
Which is why techniques like rather silly techniques like saying to students, look, they've just read a text or something like that, and you say to them, which 3 words or phrases would you most like to remember, take away with you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a big thing, but it's a way of kind of saying to them, or trying to engineer in them that kind of deep processing, and saying, look, this is it's what's happening in here. That's what's going on. Not what I'm saying, or not the advice I'm giving you. What I'm trying to do is to manipulate you. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that's what I'm trying to do, by saying you decide which words you like.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way I may engineer the kind of right brain process in your head that you need. I've been going off in all sorts of different directions. I'm sorry, but
yeah, no worries. No, it's like this is what it's supposed to be about. But one last thing I wanted to mention is that, you see, we've touched 2 important areas: the student's perspective and teacher's perspective. And what you've been talking about for the last 2 minutes is my impression is that is the scientific perspective, of what's actually happening here and how to manipulate that, how to control that and make it work for us. And this is what cognitive psychologists and scientists have been shouting about for the last 100 years at least. But it seems like, when I've read things they've written and asked them questions, they keep saying that nobody's listening to us. We know, but nobody wants to listen to us. And this is like, I had that interview with Patrice Bain, who's a co-author of a wonderful book called Powerful Teaching. It's got little to do with language teaching. It's about other subjects, but I'm like, trying to find a reference to how it could work in languages. And one thing she said, very important, was interesting for me during that interview. She said, you see, teaching methods are about putting the information into the student's head. What cognitive science does, techniques such as retrieval, metacognition, and so on, is about fishing it out, taking it out, and this is where learning happens. And then I was like looking at what teachers do in classes, where you might have an impression that everything's going perfectly okay in class, and they're doing this, and that, and for example, PPP is present throughout the lesson, But when you look at it from that perspective, many teachers are not aware of those things that happen here and how they work, and hence they cannot apply it. So things that people like Scott Thornbury and others talk about, the task repetition, which is very important. For me, retrieval in many parts of language teaching and learning, in grammar, vocab, lexis, chunks, and everything, this should be done many times during a lesson, even like sacrificing 50% of the material that he wants to cover and focusing on that core thing that he really wants to the students to carry away with them from the lesson. This is for me like the most important thing that is neglected, in language classes. And wanted to ask you if you agree with that, if there is anything else that you think is unfairly neglected.
A book that I enjoyed enormously a few years ago.
Say again, sorry?
A book that I recommend, which I enjoyed enormously a few years ago. And if you haven't read it, I couldn't recommend it more highly. It's called Guitar Zero.
Guitar Zero, okay.
Guitar Zero by a man called Gary Marcus.
Uh-huh.
And Gary Marcus is himself a cognitive psychologist. But at the age of 39, having never touched a guitar, he decided he wanted to learn the guitar.
Okay.
And his book is about what happened. Now,
Uh-huh.
there's quite a lot of, I talked to so-and-so, a great guitarist, and he told me this. Well, that, okay. But he does have some very insightful things to say about how his guitar learning is informed by his cognitive psychology and what the connections are. And it talks quite a lot about the issue of whether learning music and learning a language is the same. A spoiler is that there's nothing uniquely similar about them.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't specific bits of the brain that is music and specific bits of the brain. Actually, if you're learning a language or learning music, you can see things lighting up all over the place.
Yeah.
And they're often the same things and sometimes different, but they may not be that different from when you make a bed, because that demands a whole lot of sort of hierarchical decision making and stuff like that. But anyway, there you are. I recommend the book. Well, all you can say about what you've just said is the mystery is, as I said, that I learned grammar translation in French, not many hours in real terms. We did lots of exercises of the kind that I would not be happy to see my trainees doing lots of. Fill in the blanks, transform this sentence, put this sentence into the past, now put it into the future, make it negative, make it positive, all this kind of stuff. And I don't want to recommend things like that because no, what about, no. And yet it clearly worked. I repeat, I haven't used French since I was about 17. And even then I wasn't very good. So it's not like I'm saying I'm a great French speaker. But it's amazing how much French I've got when you consider the amount of time I gave it. And it was not all being shoved into me, because everything depends on what was happening in my brain. And maybe those activities, those dreadful fill-ins and things like that, maybe they did the trick, because in the end they are retrieval exercises. I've just done a book for Cambridge University Press. It's one of these pocket books, and they call them methodology books. Slim little volumes. They're terrific. Look, I'll show you what they look like. So Pennier's 100 teaching tips, or Carol Reed's 101 tips for teaching. Scott Thornberry's 101 questions, Alan Maley's 50 creative activities, Herbert Puchter's. So the real good fun of them is that the editor was telling me, it sort of happened by accident, but they've got into the thing now where they get the writer to find a photo of when they were young. So here's a picture of Herbert Puchter teaching when he was, what was he, about 20 something or 30, something like that.
Yeah.
Here is here's a young Scott Thornberry.
Scott, yeah.
I found a picture of myself teaching in 1976. Yes, I am that old, and it was the beginning of my teaching career. And in this picture, I look awful, by the way, and I'm kind of posing. But it's a classroom in the south of England, in a place called Bournemouth. And what you see in the photograph, 1976, is students working in pairs, and they've all got worksheets. And I've tried to blow the picture up to see what was in the worksheets, but it's just not, it's not high definition enough for that. I can't see whether it's a sort of grammar fill-in, or I just can't see what it is. But the fact is that what those students appear to be doing, it looks as if maybe because of the photography, it's a small group. It's one of those luxury private language school groups, but it's a small group, and they're all working on their own doing what you've just called retrieval exercises at some level. And as far as you can judge from this photo, they're completely and utterly absorbed in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can harness that, if you can provoke that, that complete absorption, what music teachers will tell you is the demand for absolute cognitive attention when you're practicing your notes. If you can provoke that as a teacher, it's about as good as anything. I have a very close friend, much younger than me, a brilliant cellist. And he and I, he's a classical cellist, but actually we used to, before lockdown, we played as a duo, and I would sing my folk songs and he would improvise. He's the most wonderful cellist. He's significantly younger than me, lovely guy. And we've talked a lot about, and he's a cello teacher. He teaches at schools around the place, you know. And I said, what have you learned? What did you learn in lockdown? Because you had to teach cello online, and then you went back into face-to-face teaching. And this may just be him developing, but he said what he learned was how to remove himself from the equation, how to take the teacher out of the equation. And this is one very instructive story. He used to take his cello to the lessons he taught. So when a student came up with a problem, he'd say, no, look, do it like this. He doesn't take his cello with him anymore. He said, what happened when he did that is the students would just sit there going, wow. Now he says, well, what's the problem? Where are you having difficulty? Teach me how to get it right. And he says the student, it works so much better because he's getting the students to do all the processing themselves. Now, of course, he says that whenever we talk about teaching, like you and I, we talk about teaching and we make it very idealistic, as if we knew what the answer was. It's not like that. It's messy and hopeless and a disaster. But isn't that interesting? He seems to be saying what we're saying, which is that, you know, it's not. And I think this works with your whole point about putting stuff in and taking stuff and retrieving stuff. It's not about me shoving stuff in.
Yeah.
It's about what happens. If I give you language to read, to listen to, even if I'm standing there saying, listen, she gets up at 6 o'clock, listen, she gets up at 6, or, you know, something like that. Everybody, this is so obvious, it's such a cliche, but what matters is what's happening in your head while I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And so the retrieval experience, if I can make it worth your while so that you invest in it, you, my student, you have to invest in it. And so maybe the biggest challenge we have is not even the activities or the tasks or anything else. Maybe the biggest challenge is, how do I get you to invest? How do I persuade you to invest? And we can leave the interview on that question, because I don't know what the answer is. Of course I do. Well, we all do. We know some of the answers. We sort of know what we're trying to do. That's the big challenge. And so to come back to where we started from, what online taught us is that unless you've got a sense of community, of group purpose, of decent interrelationships, you'll never get any of that investment taking place.
Jeremy, that's been an awful pleasure to talk to you today, and everything we've mentioned, you talked about, and you kind of put together, I think will be very inspirational to teachers who listen to this. And like, you know, to me, from my point of view, many things you said I can relate now to both my learning and teaching process, because you see, if I just can have that quick thing at the end, just to tell you about my Italian again, where I started with in traditional way. I started listening a lot. I started using Duolingo and some apps, and after like half a year, I decided to put it to a test, and I went to Italy, and I failed big way. And then I got back, and I started wondering, so what am I doing wrong? So I got a teacher, my friend who's Italian, and I asked her for online classes. And first thing she did in that online class, she pulled out a course book, and we started literally for like a few minutes. We started doing something with that course book, and I told her, no, this is not working for me. I don't want to learn like that. And I said, let's try something different, okay? And I said, let's try from me, because if I am to talk to Italian people again, what I didn't have during that experience is that I wasn't able to talk about myself, to describe my world, my job, kids, you know, and everything. I couldn't even say that, because the only things I studied were things like those men are wearing red trousers and so on, you know, totally useless stuff that we keep doing, like, you know, when we are learning. And we switched, and she was amazed herself that after about 3-4 classes, I started uttering full sentences and playing with them, you know, changing them. Then we started using some pictures, some flashcards, and with, for example, with families, when we're talking about families, and I was already ready to use that model that I learned about myself and describe another family, and it was like, whew, suddenly speed up, you know, and something started happening. But you see, many things we talked about today, they were there, but maybe me and my teacher, we weren't aware of all of those parts of this process, you know. And my point is to become as aware as possible of those three approaches three perspective, you know, student, teacher, and scientist, merging that together.
I agree. We haven't even touched on how come you speak English like you speak English. That's a whole other story, and that's for another time. I've spoken to a lot of people like you and saying, how come you speak such good English, and blah, blah, blah. And most people have a story like, well, there are 2 or 3 things. One is a story like that. I remember a Greek woman saying, well, it was because I wanted to read English fashion magazines when I was a teenager. There was a Cuban guy who wanted to play a computer game, but you needed English. But there are also people who said, well, I had this teacher, you know, and he this, he that. I'm thrilled. I was just thinking about your trying to marry up your Italian experience with my Mexican experience, and there was a sort of click, because I sort of described that, didn't I? It was, you know, the things that I wanted to say in my life that I needed to say.
Yeah.
The same brother who I've mentioned before this thing, the condition he has progressed so badly, he used to go to, he and his wife used to go to Spain, southern Spain, in the winter, because it's warmer, and they live up in the north of England. And I remember ringing him once on mobile phone saying, how are you? How are you getting on? You know, and so I said jokingly, how's your Spanish? You know, and this my brother is a language teacher. He very good one. And he was particularly adept at teaching at very high levels and giving those students something to chew on and focus on. Maybe he was very good at this, you know. And he replied to me, he said, Jay, he calls me Jay, he said, Jay, it's amazing. He said, you know, it's going really well. He said, you know, the other day I wanted a glass of wine. So I asked someone how I could ask for a glass of wine in Spanish, and they told me, and then I went and asked for a glass of wine in Spanish, and I'm kind of learning it. This is an experienced language teaching. And I said, yeah, Philip, and And I mean, what's so special about that? Because he just said everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. And it had surprised him, which is ridiculous because he's a very good teacher. He knew that, but because it was a personal experience, it surprised him. He wanted to know how to order a glass of wine. His life, you describing your children because you wanted to communicate that, to be able to talk about that. Me needing to go to the mechanic in Mexico and needing that and something like that. And me then saying to my then girlfriend or to anyone who would listen, I don't understand. Why do you say that instead of that? What's going on?
Yeah, yeah.
And they would tell me, and me kind of having my ears out on stalks when I heard an expression that I liked, and then I would try and use it and see what the reaction was from people around me. And if they kind of went, then I'd go, oh shit, I must have got that wrong, or something like that, And so it's all happening in here. It's all happening in here. And you, with your Italian teacher, of course, have agency, and you also have a much more developed sensibility than a lot of your students of English will have.
Yeah. Because
you kind of know the territory,
and
wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. But the you can talk to anybody in language teaching. You talk to I had lunch with a very nice woman called Antonia Clare yesterday, who I like very much, who's a very good teacher, coursebook writer and stuff like that, and funny enough, she speaks fluent Italian, but that's a pure good, and all of us completely obsessed. Even at this age, I'm still completely puzzled and fixated by the mystery of what we do. It's a mystery.
It is.
You can develop the best computer systems in the world, but I still want to talk about whether dogme works or not.
Jeremy, I've been thinking about it, the summary for this whole conversation for like some time now, and you've just done it. You've nailed it. It's like, what else can I add? This just wonderful how you put it all now, everything we've talked about into this lovely summary. And I couldn't agree more with you here, that this is what it is all about. Thank you very much. And I know I've taken much more time than we had been thinking of, but thanks for this. I think this will be beneficial to many people who will watch this. And
I hope so. I don't envy you the task of trying to edit some sense out of this, but you embarked on this. This is all your fault. So
yeah, no worries. I only hope that maybe one day we'll have a chance to meet up in person.
I would like that.
I'll be in Oxford for about a month this summer. So if I'm somewhere near Cambridge, maybe we'll have a chance to have a coffee and
in
just
Spanish. They have in Mexican Spanish. They have a wonderful saying. They say, "En Cambridge tienes tu casa," which means in Cambridge you have your house.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. And looking forward to that. Thanks again. It's been amazing. All the best to you, to all your plans, and hope everything goes well.
And maybe hope to see one thing I want to do is I want to hear you play music. That's what I'd like. That'd be really good. But that might happen. If we meet up and there are instruments somewhere near us, that'll be something. I've got about 8 guitars here, so I reckon.
Fantastic.
See you later.
Can't wait. Thank you. See you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.